Hey, our next speakers are Minh Nguyen and Jeff Meyer. Minh has been contributing to OpenStreetMap. Hold on a second. There we are. Minh has been contributing to OpenStreetMap, an open historical map since 2008. On any given day, you'll probably find him wandering the streets of San Jose in search of quirky, overlooked details to add to the map. He also has, interestingly, and I don't know anybody who has a collection of rest area highway maps. Jeff Meyer is a military brat, former Air Force intelligence officer, high-tech product manager, and now an amateur historical map maker. He has been working on the idea of a map-based online time machine, for too long to mention, an open history map since 2012. One day, all of the maps in the historical atlases weighing down his sagging bookshelves will be available on OpenHistoricalMap. Thank you. Nice to meet you.
Thank you. Set up here with Jeff. Just to start out with, how many of you have heard of OpenStreetMap or OpenHistoricalMap? Oh, sorry. How many of you have heard of? Okay, so we have quite a few people who have heard of either of these projects. So that's a good start. Yeah. So just to kind of a brief intro, OpenHistoricalMap is exactly what it says on the tin. It is a map of history, and it is open to all. Right.
All right. Thank you. First of all, I want to say thanks to the California Map Society and Tom for coming here and for having us come here and present to you guys. I'm sorry we haven't found out about you sooner. Thank you very much to the Rumsey Map Center and the staff for putting up with us and making us comfortable here. This is a great venue. As Aaron said, if you're not coming back repeatedly, it's not part of culture. And he comes back every 12 months. I'm encouraging everyone else to do the same. So because we're all interested in history, I'm going to ask you to humor me for a little bit here as I talk about my history and involvement. So back in 2004, I was reading kind of a pop culture history book called A Piece to End All Peace. You know, it was fairly academic historical work. I was reading another pop culture historical book, a documentary called The Da Vinci Code. And both of these books referred to things back in time where I wanted to see a map, right? So Da Vinci Code talked about the Council of Nicaea in 325, talked about the decampment of the papacy to Avignon in the 14th century. And I went searching for these maps. I don't think I found these maps. It's very hard to find, impossible. And then as a former Intel guy, I was like, I'd like to see a map of the Soviet Union. And you know what people had in 2004? Nobody wanted to scan a map of the Soviet Union. They wanted Russia. And then what they did have was low res. Luckily, Perry Castaneda Library down in Texas came to help. And I was like, this is horrible. It's 2004, mind you, before Google Maps. And I was like, this is no way to use the internet. This is just unfathomable. So I came up with a bright idea, right? Let's make a time machine, online time machine. And I'd like to take credit for what this is, but in 2004, this was the state of the art from a guy named Louis Lancaster at Berkeley. It's called Timemapper. And he had this thing called the Electronic Cultural Atlas Initiative. And it was cool. Had a time slider, had maps, you could load layers. But the question was where to get data. I don't know how to get data. And the data that I would get would only be on my machine. I had to go find them, shape files. How many of you have ever searched the internet for shape files? Yeah, we can talk later. But that was 2004. So time goes on and people start doing some really cool stuff with historical mapping. Here's a project from Carl Grossner here at Stanford called Orbis. And the reason I'm going through these is to outline what's good about a shared system, a historical time machine that everyone can use. Great map, shows me Roman transportation systems, but I can't add data. I can't zoom in. I can't slide the map around. But it's awesome, right? But it just can't give me what I want, which is for that Council of Nicaea in 325, what's going on in India at that time? What's going on in a city at that time? Then we have another example here. We're going through time. It's like Orbis, I think it was 2008-ish is when it started. This is from around 2012. It's called Timemapper. It's from an individual in San Francisco, Bradley Thompson. And it's pretty cool. It's actually way ahead of its time. It's driven by fusion tables. Oh, by the way, if you want to know what David Rumsey needs a container for, it's time maps. So he can run time maps in the future and see what it was like in 2004. For this, they need to create fusion tables, which no longer exist. So it can't drive this. But this had an old map. It was taken from something that looks familiar, 1853 Coastal Survey, and had data from a city directory and a coastline of San Francisco that may not look familiar to you. But this is pretty cool. But again, one city, one person controlled the data, couldn't get the back end, couldn't get any data into it. And then also there's this proliferation of online vector maps. This is open data, Creative Commons license, but it's at the end of the day, even though it's a vector piece of data, it's just a picture. And you can try and reverse out the projection of that and put it into a GIS system. I wish you good luck on that. This has so much rich data that you can't get to. It's like a cookie inside of a cage just out of your reach, right? You're like, oh, I want that, but you can't get it. So, sorry. One last point about the Bay Area connections here. Around this time, as I was meeting with Bradley Thompson and some other people, a guy named Mike Magursky, who some of you may know, talked over beer, and he said, hey, you should call up this guy, Steve Coast. And I think he has something you're looking for. And I was like, Steve Coast. Here he is doing his best Napoleon impression. If you listen close to the chat, there's no subtext there. And Steve's like, he's the starter of OpenStreetMap, got it running, made it the foundation of what it is today, which is tremendously successful. If you haven't seen it, you should check it out. I mean, this is a very rich data set. You see it all over the place, even if you don't know that that's what it is. It's driven the development of huge companies like Mapbox. Facebook now uses the data, tons and tons of other people. Rich, rich, rich data set. You may even see some Indian reservations or native indigenous people's reservations somewhere on this map as well, rendered less well than the Apple team. And he said to me, to my relief and chagrin, take it all. Just use our software. Yeah, you can just install it yourself. And I was like, you don't know what you're talking to. I'm not sure I can install it myself. And luckily, there were also people in this community who were interested in history. A guy named Frank Roberto started talking about using OpenStreetMap for history in 2009. And I was like, okay, pretty cool. Got a community, got software, got data. Actually, no. I got everything but the data. For reasons that are too long to go into, the data is kind of encumbered, and I wanted something that was completely like as little copyright as possible so that we could share the data. That's part of the whole virtue of this system. Not only can anyone put data in, anyone can get the data out. And the license that OSM was using wasn't really going to be helpful for that. So the other thing this is missing for a time machine is there's no way to go back in time. Like there's no time slider, there's no time control. So this was in about 2012. And the project kind of foundered until a few years ago when we added a time slider. And then people started contributing data, and we cheated to fill up the map with a terrain layer. But you can see we've got a time slider. So July 9th, it was supposed to be August 19th to match today, 1853. An outline of some major features, states. We can see what's here. If we went back to, and I do want to say every single presentation that we've had today has had some connection in some way to OHM. Everyone I've looked at and everyone I've heard about, we'll talk about it some as we go along. But like you could go back to 1878 or 1783 to see where the little panhandle from New Jersey was. And it was in Pennsylvania. Because on that map, New York hadn't split. But you can also see some things here that don't show up on normal maps, like this region called Comancheria, which is problematic for 100 reasons. And it's not a very good depiction of that land for either its source or representation. But people are starting to build. If you build it, they will come. And people are starting to put data in. So the question, though, is, after you look at all the beautiful maps that we've seen today, why would you ever want to take something like this, which has history? It was a document, meant something. It's created by a single entity, not some faceless horde in the cloud. And there's a vision behind it. It matches all kinds of thematic information, has cool old coastlines. What looks to be a mash of a city, but is actually a very detailed map of the city, very accurate from that time. So there's like 2 or 3 key map makers at work here. And so, you know, to show that we put all that data into this open historical map. And you might be saying, hey, that looks a lot like past mapper. So you built something that a guy built 20 years or 10 years ago using some kind of like easy tools. You want a cookie? And the answer is yes, indeed, there is a little bit more there. And I'll show some of the things that you can do. So I can go back in time, again, for a problematic representation. If you think representing indigenous and First Peoples for well-known and established boundaries like modern reservations is tricky, think about when there were no boundaries, where the idea of a boundary is anathema to the culture of the people you're trying to represent. This is a small experiment. We don't want to do too much, go too far in that without having further discussions. Or you could go forward in time to see the footprint of the Great Fire, 1906, right? So here's a representation, a way that you can start taking data from multiple sources and combining it for kind of a, I don't want to say a richer picture, but a picture that can be used to inform other purposes. And I want to emphasize too, that when I started looking at this from say 2004 to even the last few years, a lot of people in the humanities are building custom sites, building hosting all around their own setup system when they could use a free service online to host this data and serve it up to them and author. And Min's going to talk about that in a second. One other thing we can do, we can style the data. If you've ever heard of Mapbox and seen the ways they style OSM data, you can do the same with OHM. We can slide around the earth. Does anyone recognize the similarity? Blow your eyes. It's in London. The year is 1854. That's the same area as John Snow's Colorado map. So you can start taking and telling these stories with other information taken from the map. And so when you talk about pulling the text out of the maps, we're also talking about pulling points of interest, streets, shapes, buildings. Every single old map that I looked at today, I just thought, wow, there's no reason that shouldn't be an open historical map. And you don't have to do the small things too. We've got data representation behind these objects, and you can link to sources and connect them to other things, or do things like, what was the shape of the Ottoman Empire before this? What was the shape after it? Aaron Cope is a big fan of the preceded by and followed by tags. I think I got followed by right there. You know, to point out what came after this, what was before it. Maybe it was a building. Maybe it was a library, like the Branner Library, which used to be on History Corner. We've got an object there that represents its locations. Soon to be a new one. So now I'm going to turn it over to Min to do the heavy lifting.
Thanks, Jeff. Yeah, so you saw quite a bit already, and that's going to be kind of hard to follow up because I wasn't involved for a lot of that, but I am involved these days in helping to populate the map. So this is Open Historical Map when you're on a slow connection. Okay, so this is the map with the time slider. This is the main map. And we're zoomed into downtown San Jose, which is a very large city, and we are just getting started mapping it. So you'll see some things that are wonky, not quite complete, but bear with me. So the way that you contribute to Open Historical Map, the most basic way is to zoom into a neighborhood like this and click the edit button. Anybody can do this. And for those of you who are familiar with OpenStreetMap, this is just like that, except, wow, there's a lot of overlapping stuff. And that's because of all the different layers of history that have built up over just this one area. This is a block that is sometimes known as Block 1. And it's home to all kinds of stuff that's kind of notable in San Jose history. So for example, if I go down here, there is a somewhere. Okay, there is a point of interest here marked for Chinatown. This is the site of San Jose's first Chinatown. And we know the very specific end date of this because that's when the settlement was burned to the ground in an arson. And that was amid rising anti-Chinese sentiment. So because of that incident, there's a group out of the archaeology department here at Stanford that did some very intensive studies of this area, some of the artifacts that have been recovered. And they published just a wealth of information about what was there at the time, as well as made a lot of things like old maps more accessible. So we're benefiting from some of that. This same block also has one of the first, if not the first, broadcast radio stations in the world, and that's an experimental radio station here. But those are the kind of the really like serious things. There's also like, for example, so I didn't know this before I started mapping OpenHistoricalMap, but San Jose has a bit of a tradition of moving buildings. So this is the Hotel Montgomery, and in 2000 they moved it over here, and it is apparently one of the heaviest buildings ever moved on rubber tires. So there's a little factoid for today. But I realized that in mapping this history, I had, yes. Yeah. That's the interesting thing about this project. We don't have formal layers that you would have in a typical GIS system. Everything is actually crammed into the same space. But what we do have are start and end dates so that you can filter. And just like on the main map, it is possible to filter the start and end dates. So for example, if I want to omit everything before that move happened, let me change that to 1999 as the end date. And you'll see they didn't build over this formal location yet. They didn't move this hotel. So that's one way we're making sure that we're not kind of overwhelming the map. You can also navigate things. Yes. Yeah, and I want to be clear. Like this is we're just scraping the surface here of all that we can do with linked data, right? So this is a view of like both those locations on the same map, explicitly saying like this is the order in which they were, and so you can start to build things off of that. But I'll get to that later. So I did want to. I realized as I was making this presentation that I omitted something. That's this building here. This is one of San Jose's San Jose's old post office building. And so I'm going to demonstrate how you can contribute to the map. I want to add that building as an area. I'm going to just draw it pretty crudely for now, and I'll come back and clean it up later on. I'm just going off of what I see in the satellite imagery, which is an option when it's something that's still present. Obviously, old buildings aren't always present in these aerial imagery, and so you'll have to kind of fall back on older maps, some of which you've seen already. But this is a building, and I'm also actually going to map it as a post office. Post office. All right, perfect. I want to indicate, it's giving you all these warnings because, whoa, this building is overlapping these alleys in the same space and time, right? That's no good. So I'm not going to use an old map to determine the start and end dates of this building. Instead, this building happens to be on the National Register of Historical Places. So if I go back to, oops, all right, I'm going to jump around a little bit. So this is a screenshot of part of the application for getting that building on the National Register of Historical Places. And so lots of details. I'm not going to enter it all right here, but it's just text, right? It's not even an old map, but I can still contribute to creating this kind of monolithic giant map of everything. So I'm just going to make sure to add when it was first built. So we can see that it was completed and occupied on February 1st, 1895. Hopefully I can remember that date. 1895. And what was the day there? That was February 1st. Thank you, everyone. All right. And it's still there, so I don't have to enter an end date. And I'll call that this is me typing with one hand. Yeah, exactly.
As they see fit.
Yeah. So there's going to be a lot more to add, of course, right? There's all this information here. There's probably other information about what came before this building. But we're going to leave it there for now. I'll click save. Yeah, yes.
I'm curious how you handle desperate information. One person does what, it's the Wikipedia issue.
Yes.
Okay, two things there. First of all, love to have that problem. Please have conflicts. Like, we don't have a lot of that quite yet, and I am cherishing that moment. But I think the other thing you do is that we ask everyone to source. Where did that thing come from? And the source tags can consist of things like links to the actual map, links to other supporting information, links to the tiles that maybe you georeference the map and you're saying, look, I georeferenced this map one way, somebody else georeferenced it a different way. There might be conflicting even georeferences, but we ask that you put that all in there. And if you don't, one, shame on you, but two, the dispute will be easy to settle.
But can you tell us the process, either specifically or generally, about how you would take one of the maps that was presented today? And
great question. Let me go ahead and save this first before I keep on going. Yeah,
Please.
It's just a building. There we go. So I upload that, and that's actually just going to be live on the main map in a matter of minutes. I didn't have to ask anyone for permission. This is a totally open project. We were sort of prepared for that question. Let's see, where is
What you need?
Yeah, I need the URL to that stock farm. Okay. Oh, you have it set up.
Yeah. So what I've already done is, how many people here have ever georeferenced an old map? Okay. So that's the first important step, is that you have to take a map and make sure it lines up with the proper places on the earth. There are many tools for doing this. There is a very popular one called MapWarper that is very kind of upload your own map friendly, but there is also another tool called All Maps. And if you're using a IIIF map, like I noticed some of you are, the beautiful map from Mexico City today is from IIIF. All the work's on Rumsey's map site, IIIF, and most of the stuff at Stanford. You can take that URL, what's called the IIIF manifest, put it on the editor, All Maps editor website, and then start georeferencing. And then it'll give you a little URL that you put back, not a IIIF tag, because we can't support that yet. Soon, maybe, not soon. I should make that statement. But you get an XYZ tile, if you've ever heard of that, and we put it back there. And that could also be an ArcGIS web server map surface layer.
Okay. Yeah. So what you see here is, we have georeference an old map, and you can just trace from it, just like you saw me trace earlier from present day ortho imagery. So it's all the same, right? Obviously we want you to make sure you're tracing from out of copyright maps, not,
So some background on that map.
Yeah.
Stock farm, it's here at Stanford. Nobody kind of knows where it is, except there's a newer farm. There's that Lagunitas with water in it, depending on what time you look at. Yeah, can you zoom out?
Yeah.
And this, by the way, even farther, please.
Oh, yeah.
Well, at some point you can't zoom out and continue editing, but that's just data that I loaded in here over the past few days to kind of make a demo. And there's a lot of work. There's work involved in kind of like, okay, here are the buildings, maybe you have modern shapefile, and then you go back in time and peel them out, or you have some old, because people have made these data sets, academics and others, that can just be loaded in here. We can take pretty much anything. So.
So, I mean, you know, it's the same process that I showed earlier. I'm not going to kind of dig into the exact dates here to enter them. So that'll take a little more time. But this is what you can trace the geometry from, even if the feature is no longer extant. So great question.
Well, when you say to do this, I would say to do this, one of those things might be, hey, Bryn, I want your shape files for the sea wolf or the water wolf, right? I want that in there so I can show the changing shoreline. Can you go to the, click on the Manhattan button or Manhattan, far right? I want people to make their data available as open source. So I can go find this data actually on Internet Archive that the Manhattan project put together, and you can load that. So, I mean, I think the first step is if you have data, share it. If you're sharing it, strip away as much of the copyrights as you can. We can put in stuff that has, like, you know, other data. We copyright information here or mark it at the object level, not at the database level. So it makes it easier to filter and reuse, but you will get source attribute. We can cite you, we can do everything. Yes. Oh, wait, I didn't get to the second half of that question. The other, it might be people actually just sitting down and tracing stuff. Like I did, actually, let me just jump ahead here.
Yeah.
So, for example, there's a lot of data that you would think would be out there that's not. Like, say, for example, do you know anyone who has a set of GIS files for the old plat maps? If you do, let me know. Because in the meantime, I'm sitting here tracing stuff. And so you have it? Oh, it's a question. What's that? Okay. So, so yes, I go in there and we trace it. But then the next slide here, oops. Okay, well, we're going a little bit on the fly some. There we go. And, you know, and there's a result, right? And there's a link back to the Bancroft Library. Go Bears. So you see my point? This is all sharing and all hopefully pointing back to, you know, things of interest to other people. Anyone who wants to map. And there's support in here for, sorry. Can you get the Meyer library real quick?
The slide. Right.
So you can also add, you know, there's your inspector. You got some pictures you can add. It's a little curated. It's a little hacky, but it works. And do things like the Stanford Daily and link to the actual articles about when that thing opened. So there's a great way of connecting all the rich data sources. It's a way, it's kind of like a, I think Min mentioned this. You just pour all the data in, right? You don't worry about having a shape file. You don't worry about where to go look. All the data is hopefully in there. You filter it how you see fit. You add and link to things as you see fit. Please just put sources, start dates, end dates. Yes, ma'am, you had a question. Or you had a question.
Is there a way to link out to like a specific layer or contribution in these maps? Like say you upload your data set to a certain date range or something. Can you share that view or version of the map?
Yes. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, it depends on what you mean share. You could download it into a shapefile or something else, but there's more exciting ways of doing that, like Min can talk about.
Yeah. How do you get that? All right. Yeah. So I would go through these pretty quickly. There's, for example, there's a bunch of different tools that you can build or that have already been built based on the same database. One of them is called Overpass. And so if you've worked with databases before, every database has a way to query it, and OHM is no different. So this is a query of things that have changed on this day in history, August 19th. I think that's August 19th, right? Yeah. You know, there's a number of things all throughout the world, right? And that kind of also shows you that we've got contributors from all around the world already on the site. And looking, zooming way in, you can see a lot of things that you might not have otherwise known about. So for example, San Jose went on a land grab, just a spree for decades. Almost, it seems like every day of the year, they were adding a bazillion parcels, annexing them. And so you can kind of diff them. This is a diff between, a comparison between August 18th and August 19th of a particular year. But it's also other things. So for example, we have a very lively community of railroad enthusiasts. They used to contribute to OpenStreetMap, but they got bored because they were only allowed to map the present there, and they got into a lot of actually fights because they wanted to map the past, and we let them do that now. And it's also the little things. So like this is some restaurant that right now might not be particularly meaningful in the grand scheme of things, but it might be meaningful to someone, whoever mapped that. You can start to piece together the histories of a neighborhood, and so speaking to like who maps, right? This could actually be someone who doesn't consider themselves a historian, but they remember their neighborhood as it used to be, or then they want to, kind of preserve that for future generations. And all of these things are things that you can pick out. I'm just querying by the day of the year, but you can pick things out by what it is, or what its source is, and so forth. So yeah, a lot of possibilities there. And this is just one of the things we can build off of the data. I mean, like this is like, we didn't build this yet, but imagine like an AR app or something based on the database.
And I do want to add one more thing. Say you had your own map of the water wolf from a different era, and you're not working here with Bryn, but you wanted the water wolf areas. It's pretty easy. I don't want to say easy, but it's straightforward to have a map. Most map layers rendering tools can show that base map that you have and pull the data from us pretty easily using that overpass tool. So you can take the data and put it anywhere you want is the other thing. And it's stored there for you. One last thing. So what do we want from you guys? Share your data. Let me know what data you have. If you don't want to put it in, just let me know the data. We can do that. Also, you can easily think of thematic topics in this area. What is going on in California? Well, those ranchos, for example, show up in an old street atlas. What information do you know about that spans these different layers of time, or what history is even reflected on, even older history is reflected on old maps? And just send us our way. And anything you can think of, we've got team collaboration tools. We can help you run your stuff. So that's what our ask is to you. And thank you very much. I'll be reaching out to several of you.
Hey, I think we are about to adjourn. Thank you guys all so much for coming. Thank you to all of our speakers. Thank you to the David Rumsey Center. Well, should we be thanking our sponsors? California Map Society. This was a lot of fun. Let's do it again in a few months.